Okie dokie, looks like we've got a good group in here. I might start to kick us off. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to another of our Human Rights Network meeting. This is a really exciting network meeting today. We've got an amazing group of panellists to speak on upholding the human rights of older people. My name is Ryan O'Leary. I'm the Manager of Policy here at QCOS and working with the wonderful QCOS team in getting this event here today. I might move along and I'm keen to get my little intro and welcome move through as quickly as possible so we can hear from our panelists. So as always, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting here today. Myself and the QCOS team are coming to you from the Turrbal and Yagara land and pay our respects to elders past and present. We also like to acknowledge that we have people joining us from across this beautiful state that we call home. And if you'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which you're dialing in from, we welcome you and invite you to pop that in the chat, both so you can acknowledge where you're coming from, as well as we can see the mix of where people are joining us from. I'd also like to acknowledge any First Nations people who are joining us here today in the room. Okie dokie. So we've got a wonderful agenda here today. I'll try and skip through some of the context setting, general info and housekeeping. Then really the bulk of today will be hearing from our panelists and talking through some questions. And then we'll end with a few of the upcoming inquiries and consultations. I think anyone who works in the policy space in Queensland, particularly related to human rights, will recognise that it's an exceptionally busy time. There's never a dull moment. In terms of a bit of context setting and general information, I might just start with a little bit of housekeeping. So welcome everyone. We're hosting this webinar through Teams. I encourage you, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts, to pop them in the chat. We do have some polls planned for later today, depending on how the IT gods smile down upon us or not. So we'll see how that goes. I think if you have any technical issues or anything like that, feel free to chuck in the chat and we'll be monitoring that as we go. And while the panelists are talking, if you're able to keep yourself on mute, that'd be great. Just keep things nice and easy to hear for everyone else. Okie dokie. So for those who haven't joined us for a human rights network before, it's really a participatory network. This is a way that we really try and work together across our broad sector. It's really focusing on the policy, practice and advocacy of human rights and how that's embedded into our work. The idea is that it's really involving yourself as much as possible and learning together. It's really a way to share information and the implications for practice day to day. We do have a range of different webinars and as part of this network. It's been a really busy year, as I've mentioned, and we will touch on, it may come up through conversation, if not, we'll touch on the end that the Human Rights Act is being reviewed at the moment. We do have a webinar on Monday that's focusing particularly on that. That's a whole big conversation that I assume may bubble through today, but something that we'll touch on again at the end as well. So it's lovely to have you here. I think we will really encourage you to make any comments or questions in there and do our best to keep on top of that as we go. And as is on your screen, just a recognition that today's discussion is not specific legal advice. If you do need any legal assistance, there's a number of organisations such as community legal centres that can provide more specific advice. That's probably enough from me in terms of housekeeping. Just looking at my team, let me know if I've missed any major thing to comment on. Otherwise, I'm really excited to introduce you to our amazing panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and speak to their experience and where they work. And then following that, we'll get into the conversation. So Tilé, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself first to the group and we'll get moving.
Thanks, Ryan, and thank you for that warm welcome. It's great to be here today and join everyone in this conversation. And I also note that Jason, Sam, and Deanne and I have, worked across for many years now. So it's really great to see all of you as well in this conversation. For those of you, though, who don't know me, my name is Tilé. I'm a lawyer, and I've worked at Caxton Legal Centre now for 8 years, so part of the furniture here. And in that time, I've worked in the family, domestic violence, and elder law practice. But for the last 5 years, I've actually been coordinating our health justice partnerships. And essentially, that's lawyers that are co-located and embedded within hospitals. So we have lawyers who go out to Metro South hospitals and also Metro North hospitals, and a couple of primary health services in Brisbane. And essentially, it's a specialist elder abuse service. So where there are patients over 60 years of age, or if they're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander over 50 years of age, we can accept referrals, we can provide information, legal advice, case management, and all of our work is integrated with social workers to provide that legal and non-legal support to people who might be experiencing or at risk of elder abuse. So that's essentially the work that I do. Thanks, Ryan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tilé. I think that I love hearing those partnerships across the health system and bringing in that legal expertise. And as a social worker myself, I love the way that Caxton Legal Centre and a range of organisations bring together those two disciplines to support people. It's such an important way to work together. Thank you. I might, Jason, I might ask if you can introduce yourself now.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Jason, ADA Law. I'm one of the lawyers there.
It's just still a bit quiet. Sorry, Jason. I'm not sure if you can.
Oh, is that any better?
Perfect. Thank you, mate.
My name's Jason. I'm a lawyer at ADA Law. My role at ADA Law is particularly amongst responding to elder abuse. It's looking at enduring powers of attorney, guardianship, and administration. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and talking to you about the Human Rights Act and how that interplays in those specific areas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. I think across this network, we hear so many different ways that the Act does really interface with practice. And yeah, I think zooming in on this particular work is going to be so interesting today. Samantha, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. My name's Sam Shipman. I'm the Manager of Investigations for the Office of the Public Guardian. Our team conducts investigations into allegations of abuse, neglect and exploitation of adults with impaired decision-making capacity. So predominantly that does relate to older persons. It's the majority of instances that we investigate. We investigate the actions of independent decision makers, such as powers of attorney, guardians, administrators, and informal decision-making arrangements. And our purpose is obviously to promote the rights and interests of the adult that is alleged to be subject to the abuse, and ensure that they have adequate and appropriate decision-making arrangements in a supported decision-making way.
Thank you, Samantha. A vitally important safeguard for our community. And last but by no means least, Deanne, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks so much. Ryan, my name's Deanne Lawrie, and I'm a Regional and Remote Community Engagement Officer with the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit. I'm coming to you today from Yagara country, and our role with the helpline with the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit is mostly to run a helpline, a 24-hour, a statewide helpline. It's not 24 hours. And I guess how I would fit in this scenario with the other speakers is that we're basically the contact point for anyone that's concerned about elder abuse, and then often we refer them on to the other speakers that are here today with their services. But usually our work also involves supporting anybody that might be worried about an older person, the older person themselves. And basically what we do is sort of try and firstly, validate what that person's going through, then look at what options they might have, and provide a lot of support to them. But we also do deal with, families who are quite, upset about what's going on. So often we're providing a lot of education. So hoping that, that having that Human Rights Act in the background does support our work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan. Lovely to have you here. And I think that mix of perspective and role is going to be really interesting for the conversation today. I can see some people have popped in the chat where they're joining us from. We really appreciate that. And there is a question there. We are recording this webinar. We do intend to share that as best as we can. It just depends a bit on the content and how we go through. So there'll be communications out afterwards around how we can try and share the recording, depending on how we go through the day. So we'll touch on that at the end. Now, I believe we're going to try and launch a poll to get us started, to get an understanding of people's perspective across the room. So we're just going to see if the IT gods allow us to do that. Lauren, I think you're the one crossing your fingers there. Okie dokie. It seems to have popped up on my screen. So we've got the question there. What adjectives or words come to mind to describe older persons or people? I want to just start with a bit of a reflection on the words that come to mind and the different perspectives and interpretations of working with older Queenslanders and Australians. We should have, as it goes in there, a word cloud that starts to emerge. You can see we've got 20 responses there now. I can't see it pop up on my screen. That could be my own.
There's a pop-up on mine, but it only says neglected, which is quite telling about how we feel about aging. I think.
Let's just see.
This is where I'm a little nervous about the tech behind this today, and whether it's worked. But another option could be to just put your answers into the chat in case that's more effective. I do apologise.
Yeah, just bear with us. We can see we've got a nice number of responses. I'm the same as you, Tilé. I can only see. Oh, sorry, I think it was Jason that said only has neglected there, which I do think does tell us an interesting perspective there.
And it could be whether perhaps the settings of the poll. I'm just not sure. But if anyone feels comfortable just popping your answers in the chat at this point, sounds like it might be a bit. My apologies, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. I think if you are able to do that, maybe just try popping directly in the chat. We'll just see what we can kind of find there. Just having a look as well if there's a back-end response I can get. Here we go. I was able to download some. As always, we're leaning on technology and adapting as best we can. If you give me 1 second, I've got a export list here that I'll see if there's commonalities as well. I'm seeing some responses. There's a bit of a theme around experience and experienced. Can see in the chat there, valuable, vulnerable, wise, knowledgeable. Got in here, invisible and ignored, history, resilient. Quite a lot of people saying vulnerable there. I'm wondering, just as we start to get more responses coming through, if there's any thoughts from the panelists on that vulnerability comment. That I think from what I can see, that's the if we had a word cloud, it would be the biggest one in terms of frequency of responses.
Yeah, I think from our point of view with the helpline, I mean, we operate with an older person-centered framework, so always trying to encourage, people to hear an older person. But I think the vulnerability comes in when health deteriorates, or, for me, that's sort of probably what we see the most, where people just don't necessarily have the strength often to make those decisions that they would have made when they perhaps didn't. And obviously, cognitive impairment leads to that vulnerability as well. So
yeah, I was going to just unpack that a bit around if it is that vulnerability of engaging with an entirely new system, if it is cognitive capacity or physical health decline. I guess for all the panelists, is there some of those parts of the aging process and the interaction with our systems that you come across most predominantly?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it is difficult for older people to engage in a lot of our systems because of limitations and knowledge around IT and accessing those systems can be quite complex to navigate. So often they will rather give up and not continue to try and engage with the support systems that we have. So I think it really is so important that we make sure that systems can be accessed in multiple ways and that we consider people with cognitive impairment and disabilities when we establish our systems of how people can engage with our services.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
And Ryan, that's true for me. I just want to echo on what Deanne and Sam have said. Tilé here. I often hear the critique around referring to people as complex or vulnerable, but then, reminding ourselves that it's actually the systems that are complex and it's the systems that create that vulnerability. And so what is our role in that, in the system to ensure that people can navigate it, that people are able to, to work and live in the environments that they can safely and happily. But I do like a lot of the comments that are very positively framed, like wise, valuable, experienced, because the research around one of the biggest drivers of elder abuse and ageism is the devaluing of older people in life, because they're seen to not be contributing to society. So it's that sort of idea that they're older and, that there's no more use of having them around. And, we're obviously an aging population, and that kind of framing really needs to shift. And I think I have seen a paradigm shift in the, in the last few years across systems, justice systems and health systems, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, thank you.
I totally agree with what Tilé's saying. Yeah, especially the ageism. I think, we talk about systems, but we're part of that system. Our values, they certainly shape it as well. So how we talk to an individual older person is, is really critical. We need to be, I think we can talk about systems, but individually we can all just have a better approach to older people and be more respectful, regardless of where they're at in that, health system or cognitive, spectrum.
Yeah, thank you, Deanne. Just a reminder to folks to just check and pop yourself on mute if you're able to while we're chatting away. I did just want to ask there, because I think it was really interesting, that devaluing comment, because I saw, and apologies, we'll be able to share the full data set we got from the initial poll at the end of the session, but there was almost a parallel there around valued and devalued that came through in terms of the different perspectives. I think Sandra Smith has a comment in there about vulnerability in two ways. Firstly, because the world has changed so much, and secondly, with the subsequent decline in physical health and the vulnerability that comes through that. I did want to, just hearing your initial comments, ask about your thoughts on, there seems to be such a change that's happening. So the world's changing, our systems are changing, they're very complex. But I wonder if there's something in there that you can talk to about their identity changing, and it's a progression for them that I think we all go through the aging process. But to me, it feels different to some of the other conversations we have about working with vulnerability, where that may be something that's been due to factors in early childhood influence, or those driving factors being earlier in life, compared to having lived a full life and then having things change sometimes quite quickly at the later times. So just that support needed for people to go through those transitions. I'm curious if any of you have any comments or thoughts about that.
I'll start. Hey? I would think that probably the difference is, for a lot of older people, grief and loss is a big part of their situation. So whether it's a loss of, independence or functionality, but usually around loved ones as well. And I think that's a really, it stands out for us on the helpline that people are really often struggling with that. And so makes them, I guess, vulnerable to abuse, but also to just simply getting through life and making those decisions. And I think it's one of those, I mean, young people obviously, suffer grief and loss as well, but when you're at that end of life where, making decisions to leave an abusive relationship can be a lot harder than when you're younger. So I think that, depending on where someone's at with their, and in saying that, older people can get out of really horrific situations as well and be very strong about it. I don't want to downplay that, but I think that, it's a very different stage in life than when you're in your mid-20s or 50s.
I will add as well, Ryan, that, when we're talking about older people, generally we're talking about people over 60. And in my work, I've worked with 90-year-olds. We've even had a couple of clients come in who are in their hundreds. And so the life experience of someone in their 60s is completely different. There's a 30-year age difference to someone who's in their 90s and above. And so what they've experienced in their life will be completely different. And that intersectional lens that Deanne touched on as well, I think is really important, because we're not just looking at older people in terms of like where they've come from generationally, but also, what is their migration background? What languages have they spoken in their life? Where have they lived before? They may have had different forms of disabilities throughout their life, and then maybe even later in life they're experiencing different forms of disability. So that kind of, understanding of what a 60-year-old Aboriginal woman might experience will be completely different to how you might approach, an Asian older person who has come from, a different country and doesn't speak any English. And those are things that we have to be aware of as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tilé. A really good point. And I think certainly we should be mindful through this conversation that we'll kind of be talking about a group of people, older people, and there's so much diversity in that. Whether it is that age range that you mentioned there, let alone experience and identity and all that intersectionality. Before we go into some of the questions, I did just have one other off-script thing I wanted to throw to keep our panelists on their toes this morning. Tilé just mentioned the ageing population in Australia, and I just wanted to ask your thoughts on the scale of support compared to possibly previous years, or any considerations you have of what that projection might look like over time. I know there's different commentary around, reviews into our aged care system and what that looks like, and workforce needs, and there's lots of conversations on what we're expecting to see with the demographic shift and progress of our broader Australian community. But I'm wondering, in terms of your work, if that's starting to come through even now in terms of increases in demand, or any considerations like that you might just want to touch on.
I can go. We're definitely seeing an increase in demand and a variation in cultural backgrounds. There are, however, I feel perhaps lost opportunities, particularly in regional remote areas where there is a risk of underreporting, minimal services to be able to, or a reduction in services to be able to engage within their local community. I think presents those people at greater risk as well.
Yeah, I'd have to back Sam up on that. Currently, I failed to mention this at the start, but my current role at the moment is doing some work in regional and remote communities with, particularly with First Nations people. So just seeing, the lack of health services available in a lot of communities, I think is a real challenge, for older people in general. So yeah, I think there's that's something that we need to really consider and be mindful of.
Yeah,
Ryan,
sorry.
No, go for it.
I'm not a social scientist and I don't have the stats or data in front of me, but I think we can all agree that we are an aging population. And I think from what I've seen, it's meant to increase really quickly in the next 20 to 30 years and then drop off. But what we're seeing and what we're learning from the social scientists who are doing this research is that there's going to be a huge transfer of wealth from old generations to younger generations. So the potential risk of elder abuse, for example, or of human rights issues arising is only going to increase. And the way that services are funded, they're not funding services to meet that projection. They're not funding services to be able to support the increasing aging population. So that's definitely an issue. But I do think, and we might touch on this later on if we have time, that Human Rights Act can help us leverage the needs of older people to funders and to government to ensure that we're appropriately resourcing the sector in that space.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective with the helpline, we were just talking about this yesterday, is that there does seem to be more services in this space for elder abuse. Like I've been with the helpline for about 10 years now, and our referral list is definitely getting broader. And so that's promising. I think that there is a sense of trying to spread that load around the state more so than, I definitely think, there needs to be probably more funding in that space, but there is definitely a sense that there is an effort at least to try and, I look at, Jason's service with ADA Law, they're kind of broadening that into the outback, and the Seniors Legal Support Service in Cairns are broadening their work into the Cape. So, in terms of trying to cover the state, I think there's definitely progress. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for that, folks. Okay. I'll move into some of our questions for the panelists. I do invite anyone joining us, if there are any comments in response to what's being discussed, any questions that come to mind, please do use the chat function there. I really invite you to keep me on my toes in trying to balance some of the questions that we'll put to the panelists here to discuss, but also trying to keep an eye on the chat function. It's good to test me out. I'm going to start with the first question, and these questions I'll put to the whole panel and invite you to jump in as you see fit. Firstly, we wanted to ask, what are some of the circumstances that you've come across in your work that enliven human rights considerations or concerns with respect to older people? And how does the Act help to achieve improved human rights when these situations occur?
Yeah, I'll jump in with this one. So, two of the key legal principles from Human Rights and in our Human Rights Act are proportionality and reasonableness. And that's been some of the real big changes that have happened from having a state-based legislation that we can apply, as opposed to an international convention that we're a signatory to. So something entrenched in our legal system that allows us to consider human rights in specific ways. So looking at those rights specifically. And if I look at the work in elder abuse and I think of the planning tools or the prevention tools that we have, those are key things to embed in those documents. So your enduring powers of attorney, what ways can you consider what needs to be done? And if things don't work out, what strategies are there to kind of unpack the issues or kind of resolve them? So those are two things that I would add.
Thank you, Jason. Any other initial thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, I might also add and piggyback on Jason's comments. As lawyers, I think nearly every interaction we'll have some kind of human rights consideration, particularly in the course of providing advice. And so I just wanted to add on to Jason's comments around when you're thinking about enduring powers of attorney, for example, one of the first questions that you're asking that human rights decision-making framework is, what rights are enlivened in that conversation. And so often when we're looking at enduring powers of attorney, we're looking at lots of different rights, but the right that I think is probably the most important in that situation is the right to privacy and reputation, because that right covers off on a person's physical and psychological integrity, their identity, their autonomy, their dignity as a human person. And so when you're helping someone to make a power of attorney, you're helping them to put their will and preference forward for how they want decisions about their their life to be made moving forward, if they ever, in that really unfortunate situation where they may have impaired capacity. And so my advice might be around how do you, make that power of attorney personalized for you. What are the things that are important to you? Because often we look at it as such a legal document, but you can actually include in there things like, I like to go on walks, and I want this painting to come with me to wherever I live next if you have to put me in a nursing home. What are the things that you want to be able to have in terms of your quality of life that you can include in the power of attorney document that can help the decision maker, whether it's, the public guardian, or whether it's the public trustee, or whether it's a family member. What are the things that will help them to make sure that you have the quality of life if you ever lose capacity? And then I guess also working in a family violence space and elder abuse space. We're again navigating that right to privacy and autonomy, but we're also navigating that right to family, because a lot of the perpetrators, sadly, of elder abuse are the sons and daughters or family members of older people. And so often they say to us, I don't want this relationship to end. That's my only family member, or whatever the case may be. And they want that relationship to continue. So then we sort of have to help them navigate how can they continue to have that relationship, if they can have it, and have it safely, and have a meaningful relationship where we can, have safety planning and measures in place that might reinforce their safety, but also allow them to have that relationship. And Deanne talked about, lots of different services that exist now. There's mediation services and counselling services for older people and families, but there's not enough of that around, because I know that I have clients, and when I try to refer them, that they can't access those services sometimes. And then obviously, directly dealing with public entities. So, I'd mentioned before that we work in Queensland, we work in hospitals, but we also deal with other departments like the Department of Housing. And so, lawyers and social workers in our team have that role of advocacy. And we often might write a letter or talk to, a treating team, a health professional, or even the Department of Housing to help realise some of those rights. So an example I can think of is I had a client where we had an elder abuse issue, but then he also had this sort of side issue where his treating team was saying that he had a mental health condition. My client completely was like, I don't have those mental health conditions. I don't know what they're talking about. I've been, throughout my life, I've been diagnosed with different health issues, but I don't think I have a mental health issue. And so I just wrote to them. I don't know if I cited any sections of the Human Rights Act, but the Human Rights Act gives us that dialogue model to help us have those conversations and that language. So I just said, oh, this is what I do when I'm meeting with this client. He's said to me, he doesn't have a mental health issue. And, we've been able to maximize his engagement and capacity with us by, seeing him in the morning, or I can't remember some of the examples that we gave. Anyway, it was like 3 weeks later, we had a letter from the treating team saying, oh, you're right, he doesn't have a mental health condition, he has a learning disability, and we're going to change the way that we work with this person because we've identified that. And, that just took one letter, and then it probably took me an hour and a half to write, but that was a big shift in the way that person was treated in the health system. But that wasn't even the reason that he was engaging with me. It was a completely different issue. And then there's also, housing. I've had clients where they're on a waiting list for housing, but there's family violence, but they don't want a DVO. So I've written a couple of times, and my team have as well, to the Department of Housing to say, we shouldn't discriminate this person because they don't want a DVO. Culture is their culture. They don't believe in engaging with the legal system, or they have had issues engaging with authority and legal systems. But we are a service that's helping provide that safety and support for them. But can you still prioritize them on the housing list? And they've been able to, accelerate and prioritize that client, even though there's been no DVO. So there's lots of different examples, I think, but at least in my work, that's probably the main ways that I've seen it come up. And I really think that the Human Rights Act, it really just provided that language, because I don't think before as a lawyer I could really use, just talk like that. Obviously I'll have to cite sections of whatever act, but I think the Human Rights Act just really boils it down to the simple issues, and you can talk plainly with with public entities about some of the issues that my clients or our clients will experience.
Thank you, Tilé. They're really powerful examples, I think, and I love that framing of giving us a dialogue. I think I'm keen to hear from the other panelists if they have just some of the reflections on how we can use the Act in practice, and I think that's a beautiful way in how you've described that it does open up that conversation in how we engage, particularly with public entities. Does anyone else from the panel? I think, Deanne, you looked like you were about to jump in and I interrupted you, sorry.
Yeah, I was. I think, like we often deal with people where it's family, so you can't really apply the Act, in that sense. But just that dialogue in itself is really powerful, that you can say, people have a right to this and a right to that. I suppose one instance I had where it was an older gentleman with the police where he'd been kind of harassed by the police, and we were able to refer him to Caxton and, to help him go through that human rights process. So, yeah, I do think whilst we can't I wouldn't say I deal directly with the Act every day the way, say, Jason and Tilé probably do in their roles. But, just having that overarching Act is really, even though it doesn't apply in all circumstances, but I think just having that in the background really helps our work and helps us to kind of educate, particularly family, around the fact that, your mum or dad has a right to make, really poor decisions that you don't agree with, and, so be it. So I think that is like the fundamental stuff for us, is that just that right to, and particularly around that privacy that Jason was talking about, because I think people become attorneys and they sort of feel like they can, make decisions that they want and they think's best, and share information for people that, they wouldn't have shared with their families previously.
And I think just following on, particularly in the right to privacy, we are really mindful of that with our investigations function, and really mindful that it's quite an intrusive process. And we are obtaining people's personal information. So we apply that lens when we receive a request for an investigation. And if and where appropriate, we would much prefer that less intrusive options such as mediation or advocacy are undertaken rather than an investigation process. So that really helps us to apply that human rights lens from the very initial assessment throughout our investigation.
Thank you, folks. So I think there's a comment there that really touches on the importance of mediation through that process, and particularly with that lens of availability of service and support in regional and remote areas. Do any of you have any comments on if there's anything that you know about that's being done or funded around strengthening the capacities for mediation in remote and regional areas?
I'm not aware of too many services that are available. I know that we've had discussions recently around the need, I think, for people to be able to, firstly, to become mediators. Like, it's an expensive process, and for a lot of regional and rural communities, they often don't have access to that sort of training. So I think there are really, particularly, the communities I've been working with, there's some great individuals in those communities who could do that work for their communities. But it's having that training and the qualification, I think, to be able to do it. And like Tilé said, it's just not enough services around the state. Like, there's some great services, but they're limited in their geography as well. And people have to be in quite a small area really to get any sort of face-to-face support. So I definitely think that that's an area that we need to be looking at more and more.
Yeah, Ryan, I don't know of any progress in that space. I know that the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department that funds our Health Justice Partnership also funds a number of the mediation services across Queensland, run by Relationship Australia and across Australia. But I haven't seen anything, I mean, maybe with maybe soon, I don't know. But it's always hard to know how these things will pop up. But I think for me as well, like, I think there's different ways of resolving issues. And, when I work with, for example, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, they have yarning circles, and there's different ways of resolving issues. And I think sometimes, you know, we do have skills where we can help people to thinking of the ideas of community as a workforce that can also support their communities, and they know what's best for them. And so whether it's giving them some of the language or working with them to co-develop ways of utilizing the structures within that culture, like a yarning circle, or in I'm Samoan, so we have the similar kind of like round circle discussions where families will get together and try and identify issues and think of solutions together. I think there could be some creative work there. I don't know of anything that exists. There might be, and I'd love to hear if anyone in this session is aware of anything like that. I think that there's different ways of resolving disputes. It doesn't have to be through through going to a lawyer at Caxton. You might be able to do it within your own community. And I know that that might not be the safest way, and that's why services like ours exist. But if that is a way that's open, then people are willing to do it within their own circle of influence. I think that that's important as well to note. It's particularly from a rights-based perspective. We want people. There's also the right to culture as well. So whether that's a way to help people to resolve some of their family conflict. And I think just a quick tangent on that. When we think about elder abuse and rights, that might not be the same language that other cultures, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, use. We might talk about elder abuse, but they will often think about it as, responsibilities and duties that are owed within families. So completely different framing. And I think we can talk about how we can deal with it in mainstream, but we should also be supporting different groups to identify ways that they can heal within that context as well, because it all contributes to the bigger picture of that rights-based work that we all want to achieve.
Yeah, just going on what Tilé said too, I do agree. Like a lot of the conversations we have with people on the phones, the first step really is to look at what's going on with that family and who are the support people in that family that the older person can have conversations with. Look at perhaps if there is an adult child that's not treating the older person well, how can they as a family approach that situation rather than just simply the older person being expected to have to deal with it. And a lot of times the families themselves are a bit reluctant to step in, but I think it's about it's having those difficult conversations that's really challenging as well. So, and a lot of callers will say, oh, mum or dad won't ring the helpline, but it's around that idea of people need to actually know that they can reach out and they can have conversations. And so a lot of it is education, and I think certainly the mediation approach would be a much softer approach than having to go to a legal service, but obviously you have to have a range of services available. But yeah, definitely, I think a lot of our conversations are often resolved just by that, people thinking a different way, realizing that their parent has the right, they have opinions, they're allowed to voice them, and pushing back a little bit on their sort of prejudice.
Yeah, thank you. Really important points, and I absolutely hear your comment there, Tilé, about the cultural interpretations and language that we use there and how that may differ. I was just thinking, again, I invited everyone in the room, if there are any responses to the conversation or examples that you know of. I think while we're hearing from our panel today, the intent of this network is to really share information and knowledge across your own expertise. And so certainly if there are any of the conversations here today or any services or examples that you know of, I really invite you to pop it in the chat because it's great to be able to share with everyone. I wanted to ask around, I guess, some of the application for service providers and policymakers. We're often they're two kind of umbrellas for I can summarize people in the room that join us here today in terms of QCOS members in the Human Rights Network. Wanted to ask how they can apply the Act to support older people. I think, Tilé, you gave some really great examples. I'd love to hear more that seem to resonate with the room. But trying to understand where they can even start and how the people in the room today can start to apply some of these concepts in practice in their work.
I can start us off.
Oh, no, I was just letting it hang there to see how you went.
Oh no, I was just going to say that the Human Rights Commission, the Queensland Human Rights Commission website has a lot of great resources on how to operationalize and adopt human rights practice into your practice. Also, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Sam, but the Public Guardian also has some amazing flowcharts, and I get a bit nerdy when I go through them because it literally steps you through like a human rights thinking and a human rights approach to different things like restrictive practice or whatever it is that you're thinking through. They have their own and they publish them, so it's accessible to everyone, and you don't have to do it exactly the way they do it, because I don't think that a human rights based approach is one size fits all. It is meant to be, you're meant to, every service has different needs and different clients, so we have to really develop it for ourselves. And Caxton itself has opted into the act, so we put our hand up and said that we will be a public entity under the legislation, and so we have had to do our own thinking around how to apply a Human Rights Act within our whole service, so not just our elder abuse services, but all of our programs, and so it required a lot of shifting of our thoughts in the way that we engage with our clients, and the recognition of our roles, not just as lawyers, but as duty bearers. We have a duty to enliven the rights of our clients, regardless of where they've come from, what their issue is. And so we have to also recognize them, that our service users or our clients, as human rights holders. And so a lot of the big picture thinking was done for us in terms of our internal policies, and our the amazing lawyers who work at Caxton in our executive put together our own framework around identifying what rights are always going to be engaged when service users or clients are coming through our office. And so we identified, I think, the recognition, the right to recognition and equality before the law. So any decision that we make about who we assist, that right will be enlivened. Again, the right to privacy, cultural rights, which I've mentioned before, and also the right to a fair hearing, I think, might have been the other one. And the way that we conduct ourselves in representing someone in court if we do agree to go to court. And so all of that big picture thinking has already been done for our staff. And what's left is when we are engaging on a day-to-day basis with people, we have they've given us some thoughts and questions to ask ourselves. And the ones that I think relate mostly to older people is the ones that I've got here. I'm just trying to find my notes. Have I eliminated my own personal biases or in favor of this client receiving services? So again, that's your own accountability as a practitioner. Are you recognizing your unconscious biases? Are you recognizing where your capacity to assist someone? Have you tailored your services to promote accessibility? So thinking about the person's environment, if they're in hospital, it's actually not the best place to provide advice when a person's in a hospital. But sometimes that's the only opportunity that an older person might have to engage with us. And so thinking about how we can make sure that it's accessible within the hospital. And then also, if we have to make a decision to limit our clients' access to our services, what else can we do to support them? Can we give them what information or referrals can we make? Are there self-help kits that exist? And so there's lots of other things that we can do, even if we can't. We're not going to be able to see everyone. And if you have been following the news around community legal centres, we turn away so many people every year. But when we turn them away, we don't turn them away empty-handed. We give them information, referral pathways, and so even from a human rights perspective, what are we doing to make sure that they have at least a pathway in front of them to be able to go away and have a way to try and resolve their legal issues? So those are some of the things that we've thought about. And I will hand over to whoever wants to go next. Sorry, I keep hogging the mic.
No, I think that was beautiful, Tilé. I think that was absolutely perfect, and what we all try and achieve and what we're doing. I think one of the additional things that OPG Investigations is doing at the moment is we're embedding an early intervention practice with investigations. So by that, we're recognising that an adult has made a decision and made a choice of who they want to appoint as their attorney. And as wherever possible, we will work with that individual with an approach of building capability, providing them with education, linking them in with appropriate supports and networks so that they can, fulfill their role as a decision maker for an adult to the best of their ability. So that's something that we're embedding in our practice, and it's our first approach to how we conduct an investigation from here in.
Thank you, Deanne. I think you've been trying to jump in.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think Jason would have some good examples. No, I just like, I think in regards to what Tilé and Sam have said, yeah, because I don't work directly with the legislation, I suppose I have a different approach to it. But yeah, certainly having these laws or these rights, I think is really powerful for the work that we're doing. And a lot of it can be, you don't have to get to that worst case scenario if you can get in there and educate people early around. And I think it comes back to that core stuff around, even just ageism itself, and that is an overarching layer on all of this. And if we can talk to people about that, and that, that idea, if you're a young person, you have rights, so why is it any different for an older person to have those same rights? I think that's, and if we make our decisions without age involved in that decision, it's probably a good practice. Like if you take out someone's 80 and just imagine you don't know how old they are, what kind of decision would you make? And I think that's something I heard from the Public Guardian years ago, and it's really stuck with me, that we often really use that age lens to make decisions, or to have opinions about what people should do. And I think that's, if you can embed that in your practice, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I might offer the kind of the two different, there's a few different models that we operate in. There's the medical model, there's the legal model, and the rights-based model. And depending on which system you're in or which environment you're in, there's a kind of dominant focus. So if you're in the hospitals, the medical model, kind of the doctors are treating the patient, they're providing their expertise, and they're trying to do their best from the knowledge they have to kind of get them healthy and out back into the community. The rights-based model, we're looking at the rights that are there and how can we strengthen those rights? How can we make sure that they're realized? The legal model, we're trying to make sure there's a fairness, there's a equity and a justice that's approached in there. And sometimes they can be in conflict. And part of the challenge is to kind of negotiate, weigh up the differences between those things and try and hold some kind of holistic approach in there. What is the common ground that we can find in that thing? So that's what I'd encourage people to consider, is identifying areas of common ground. What does that look like? How can we have that conversation to invite people into spaces that allow them to kind of have a robust discussion, but also kind of leave with a bit of respect as well?
Yeah, thank you to you all. I think it's so important there what you touch on around how those different models interface, and the I guess the perspectives that everyone brings. And I certainly hear through Tilé's comment about reflecting on our own biases, and Dee's comment there around removing age and our consideration of that as a lens in what we're talking through. I think that's really interesting common points there about the perspective we bring in. I did just want to check, I think, Patricia, you may have had your hand up. Sorry, I probably got sore from holding it up so long. I did just want to pause and see if there is a question that you'd like to either take yourself off mute and ask, or pop in the chat. Okie dokie. Feel free to pop your hand back up if you want to have a comment or question, or chuck it in the chat there. And I do want to acknowledge Amanda has made a comment there about the need of interpreter services and how important they are. Lovely to see you as always, Amanda. We spoke a bit there about some of the decision making and I guess removing age from the consideration and those kind of things. And I did want to ask a question around how we can helpfully apply the human rights decision-making framework into a range of different contexts. We've touched a bit on enduring power of attorney and that kind of context, but wanting to open to the panel about how that framework particularly can be implemented and used across the experience in the room here.
I'll start. I think it is the maturing of our use and implementation of the Human Rights Act. We have matured in our approach to it over the years. But it really is an absolute lens that you need to put over every decision that you make as a government agency in your service delivery and what you offer clients. And as Tilé touched on earlier, if you are unable to offer a service to a client, then what options are you giving to them? So we do have very robust human rights decision making and recording of our decisions and recording what human rights we have considered when we make a decision, and that's across all teams in the Office of the Public Guardian, from our guardianship team whenever they make a decision for an adult. And I think one of the core and primary things is that wherever possible, and you would hope at almost every occasion, we will obtain the views and wishes of the person at the centre of those decisions. And it's equally as important, particularly if the person may have impaired decision-making capacity, to obtain views from their supports and networks. And particularly, I think, the person's history and how they've conducted their life up until that time. We need to take that into account and give them, to the greatest extent, the right to their own autonomy and decision-making, and remove our own personal biases about how we would make a decision on what we think is the best thing for that person.
Yeah, I think what Sam said there, particularly at the end, is it's so critical in the work that we do. It's family think they want to make a decision that's that's safe or protects that older person, or is easier for that family member to visit them in aged care or whatever the case may be, but they're not looking at the fact that older person that's not what they've wanted. They've made their wishes really clear. I mean, obviously, that's where conversation comes in with family as well, because it's easy for someone to say, I don't want to go into care, but oftentimes, that's maybe not a possibility if someone needs high care. So it's being able to say, look, this person doesn't want to do these things, but if they have to, then what's the best option? I mean, one of the real challenges, I think, particularly in regional and remote communities, is that a lot of older people are taken off country to go into care because there's no care services. And to me, that's a violation of their rights, because that's all they've wanted, is to go, or people are in care in out of country, and they want to go back to country, and there seems to be a real resistance for people to make that happen. And so areas like that, I think it's really critical that we do consider what that older person, what their whole life has represented, which is really critical.
Ryan, in terms of your comment they made earlier about the different, I guess, communication styles or the different ways that we work together. I was thinking about how in our health justice partnerships and the lawyers who go out, one of the things that we try to do to be persuasive in that space is to use their language, to use medical language, and Jason alluded to that medical model and that approach. But there's a lot of commonalities, particularly around allied health, and you mentioned you're a social worker. Like embedded in the social work discipline is a human rights practice, and across a lot of the allied health as well, there's human rights are embedded. The medical model is a little bit different. Like sometimes, I've heard doctors talk about beneficence, which is the idea of do no harm. But there's different ways to connect those dots for people, and I think whilst as a lawyer, I would always revert back to the decision-making framework in the Act through identification of rights. But it's like it gives you the right questions, but sometimes it's the how-to, which is what we're talking about, and I think that that's a bit harder. But there's there's 5 key principles that often I use and called the panel principles, which is I find useful because it helps me to think, what are the boxes that I'm not ticking, and so. For those of you who don't know, just really quickly, panel stands for participation. And so for me, it's how do we make sure that the person is participating to the best of their ability in our client interviews, for example? How do we know what's best for them? And often when I put that question in other workshops or community legal education sessions that I do, people will talk about, we talk to the family, we talk to the doctors, we talk to everyone else, and often they actually forget to say, we talk to the person themselves, and we send to them and we ask them what they think is best for them. And I don't think it's not a criticism. It's more, I think we often jump to the whole situation and we forget to censor the person, and that goes back to that comment around having interpreters and seeing the person independently rather than with everyone around them, making sure that we are hearing directly from them and not with a spokesperson for them. The A in panel is around accountability, and we've talked a little bit about that. Our accountability and responsibility to respect and protect people's rights. Non-discrimination is the N in that. How are we making sure that our services don't discriminate because of age or because of a disability? Are we being mindful of our language? Are we talking in a way that clarifies and not confuses people? And then also not making assumptions about a person just because they look a certain way. The E is for empowerment. Are we enabling our clients to be independent, or are we making them reliant on us? Are we making sure that they feel informed about their options? And then the L is linkages or legalities, and ensuring that they have access to advice in a timely manner, which is a human right, I think, but also a social determinant of health. And are they aware of all their legal options? And often I have clients who are aware of all their legal options after they've seen me, but they don't want to take any of them those options, and that's completely fine. But the fact that they know that they have options and that they have rights usually means a lot more to them, because they can go away and make their own decisions in future. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Tilé. Deanne?
I was going to say, I think that's really fundamental, isn't it, that people know their rights or their legal options. And that's often a lot of the conversations we're having with older people, is that if they don't know something, they can't make a good decision, or they can't make an informed decision. And that's where the education with a lot of other callers come through, where family members or workers, it's like, well, what does that older person know? What do they want to know? What do they need to be able to make a decision that, and like Tilé said, they might not change anything, but at least they are informed, and that can actually support them when they are dealing with that person in their family that's giving them grief. Just having that knowledge to be able to come back to them and say, well, actually that's not true. We've had cases where a younger person living with the older person sort of claiming they've got 50% right to the house, and that's not a true thing. And so once they're aware of that and they get legal advice, they can then push back and say, well, that's not true, and not be fearful, so that they're making decisions that maybe are incorrect because they think they're going to lose money or assets or whatever the case may be. But yeah, on top of that, they have the right to try and maintain that relationship. I think Tilé was talking about that earlier. We might think that's not what they want, but they don't want to lose that relationship. You can't get another child to, you know, replace that child. So we've got to be really mindful that people can make that decision, that you know, to uphold their relationship.
Yeah, thank you, Deanne. I think so much there that I wanted to touch on. There's really important points. I think there's a theme I'm hearing through this conversation around that education and information, awareness and accessibility. And I think that the people in the room today would have a role to play in a whole range of those things. I do want to touch, Tilé, you've mentioned the different language and approaches that everyone uses, but I do think the panel framework across all our different systems, everyone loves a good acronym. So I think that can certainly is something that can resonate with all of us in terms of getting that through. I'm mindful of time. I did want to ask about the Senate committee is due to report if we should have a federal Human Rights Act. And I think particularly in terms of how our systems interface between state and federal, with aged care systems and even primary health systems predominantly being federally funded. Do you see a need for stronger federal protections for older people? And are there any obvious pieces that are currently missing there?
I'd say if you look at some of the international jurisdictions and see how they've benefited from having more of like a federal model that we're talking about or considering. So in the United Kingdom, they were part of the European system, and there was a European Court of Human Rights that was able to pass legislation and consider matters. But things really changed when they entrenched it into domestic law and when they brought about a Human Rights Act. And it took a long time for that domestic law to kind of emerge and for that culture to develop. So I see a similar approach here in Australia, in Queensland. If we had a federal model, that would allow us to have a united language across all the states. And it would strengthen the position there. Like if we look in Queensland, from the Gold Coast to Northern Tweed and that border, but you can drive across it really easily. But the distinction between that border is quite significant, and the approach and the jurisprudence is very different. If we look at Victoria, it's a 2-hour flight away, and their jurisprudence is emerging very differently. So having a united approach would have significant benefits across, and it would help all the people in that as we plan for the future, we're able to plan wherever we live, whichever state we live in.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you, Jason. Any other panelists have any thoughts on that federal lens?
I think one of the just something really quickly from me, I think one of the benefits to a federal act would obviously be that federally funded agencies would then be required in their service delivery to consider human rights and apply that in all of their decision making. So we're looking at agencies like the NDIS and the aged care sector are all federal agencies that currently are not necessarily required. I mean, we hope that they do, but having that legislation in place to embed that in their practice would be very beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. It's such an important point. Tilé or Deanne, I can see you've come back here. I'm assuming that laptop battery is not quite getting there.
Computer issues. I'm not sure if I've quite covered. I think I heard most of it, but I suppose from our point of view, a lot of the work we do, especially around if you're looking at aged care, there's not a lot of because most aged care services are federally funded bodies, and so you've got this state Human Rights Act. So oftentimes there's a bit of a reluctance. I think that's what Jason was talking about in more broad terms, but that's one of the areas where we see quite a few, I guess, violations of people's rights, but very limited use of, not being able to use the act in that sort of formal way to actually get some results for the older person.
Oh, Tilé, you're on mute. Sorry, mate.
Tilé, you're muted.
Sorry, everyone. No, I just really want to echo Sam's point about the way public entities can be, bound by a federal human rights act. I think for me, it's the Centrelink is one of the big bodies that often our clients are like, Centrelink's doing this, Centrelink's doing that, and we don't. Obviously there's Basic Rights, who is the Social Security Community Legal Centre, so we often refer there, thankfully. But how different would Centrelink decisions be if there was a Human Rights Act influencing their decisions? But I think in terms of particular federal protections for older people, that second part of your question, I was just thinking, there's legal academics, there's a push for an international convention on the rights of older people because, and I'm not fully across that space, but I think it's because, and it's things we've already identified, that because older persons' issues and human rights issues are distinct and require special attention, particularly as population increases that we've talked about. There is a need for an international convention that covers off on the rights of older people in the same way that we have an international convention of the rights of persons with disabilities, on forms of racial discrimination, the rights of children. Because I guess the general human rights convention covers off on just society in general, and having that language again being passed down through from international level to a state level can really impact on the way that services are funded and delivered. And so there is a big movement, and Australia is actually, and Australian civil society is playing a really big role in progressing that. But as I said, I'm not completely up to date with that. But I think that if the first step would be to have probably a federal human rights act before we even got to a sort of federal human rights act for that actually relates specifically to older people. But I know that obviously within the aged care legislation there's the Charter of Rights within that. But again, and this is not my area of expertise, but the limitations of some of those is that some of those charter rights within the Aged Care Act is that they don't actually derive from human rights law, they're derived from consumer laws. And so it's all about, again, it's all about the commercial aspect of how older people interact with aged care, for example, in that example. And so I think there's a long way to go in terms of that international recognition of older persons' rights. But I think the first step would be to have a federal human rights here, because we're one of the few jurisdictions that are left that don't have one. And I think another missing piece, again, and we've talked about it, but I just want to say it out loud, is that if it's not intersectional, it's not inclusive, and that we have to remember again that older persons' rights are absolutely linked with racial justice, and many health and legal services recognize that. The health inequities, our service exists. People who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander can access our service if they're 50 years of age, as opposed to the mainstream for 60 years of age. So there's a recognition that the impacts on marginalised communities can be felt more deeply. And so I think, Federal Human Rights Act can definitely cover off on that. But I think just to, a good question that to ask, I think, as service providers is, again, the idea that I sort of mentioned before, that how can we leverage our Human Rights Act to secure funding for access to justice and health?
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. I am mindful of time, and following this conversation, we'll have a couple of other things that are on the agenda around events and then upcoming inquiries. But I did just want to ask if we can quickly fit it in, acknowledging in the context of the Human Rights Act review that's currently undergoing. I wanted to ask the panelists if there's any brief comments you can make around areas that you've seen the Act mature in over the time since it's been legislated, and any areas that you'd like to see it further mature in terms of this opportunity we have to guide and provide input to the review, and if there's anything that you really comment on that's worked well in terms of the maturity, and where you'd like to see it go from here.
I'm really hopeful in regards to the proportionality of the application of human rights, and when a right is being limited in some respect, why is it being limited, and is that the correct response? Are there any other responses that would have a better effect that would achieve the same outcome. And I've seen that across guardianship and administration. We see that with enduring documents as something being less restrictive. It involves the person. They're able to make some choices and have some control over the direction that they would like things to go. So that's definitely an area that will continue to mature as we get used to the Act and more legislation and more case law comes out to support that. So those are some key areas.
Thank you. Tilé?
Ryan, I think I think COVID delayed some of the progression of the Human Rights Act, because they kind of happened at the same time. The Human Rights Act became into force in 2020, and then we all went into lockdown. And so there's been lots of progress in terms of like policies, but I think a lot of people are still grappling with how to operationalize it. And so like spaces like this where we're having these conversations, I'm seeing them pop up more and more across health and across justice spaces. These communities of practice and community education is really important, because I think people really want to know, how do I practice human rights, in my day-to-day job, because everyone is aware of it. And I think these conversations are really important. So I'd like to see, what I guess I don't know what is beyond a community of practice. How, once we know, then how does the implementation look? So I think for me, I'm curious and excited to see how we can further mature. But I guess it'll be interesting to see some of the feedback from this process that's starting.
Thank you. Samantha, any comments from you before we kind of start to close up this part of the conversation?
Yeah, look, I think I would just echo Tilé and Jason's comments so far. Operationalising the Human Rights Act, as I said before, I feel that it has matured, and like anything, once you embed it in practice, it has improved. So we look forward to the review and the outcomes and how we can improve our practice from there.
Yeah, thank you. And Deanne, I think your screen is frozen. I'm not sure if you can hear us. Looks like you're in deep reflective thought.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, there you are. No, you're back. Any kind of final thoughts on that?
I'm not frozen now, am I? All right.
No, you're all.
Good.
You're all good.
Not too much. I think for us, or for me personally too, in the work we do, it's just the simple fact of having the Human Rights Act has been a huge positive. Obviously, understanding it, and I think for all of us, it's a continual learning about what that looks like and what it means in practice. So, yeah, any kind of ongoing improvements will be useful. I mean, I probably learned a lot today too. From what other presenters have explained. So it's just that idea of, I think, having it embedded. Yeah, if it can be across more organisations, that would be even a better outcome.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Okie dokie. Folks, I think we could talk about this for much longer. There's so many avenues and rabbit holes we could go in there. I did want to see, Tilé, if you're able to just over a couple of minutes promote the upcoming World Elder Abuse Day on 15th of June, and then we'll throw to Lauren to talk through some of the upcoming information inquiries and consultations.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So World Elder Abuse Awareness Day falls every year on the 15th of June. So I'm not sure if everyone is across that, but Caxton often has events every year, but this year we've taken a different approach. So I was hoping, I think when we first had these discussions with Sam at QCOS, I sort of said, we can promote all of our events, but it turns out a lot of our events are closed events because they were specific community groups. But what I can say, and actually Jason may have events that he may want to promote as well, is that we have a couple of events that are open to aged care workers and health workers in Metro South. And then we also have a couple of pop-up stalls in Metro North. So what I'll do is send that through to Sam and Jason and Ryan at the team at QCOS to share that around, and you're welcome to join. So those events are free. I think the one I'm thinking of is in Metro South is on the 26th of June, but it starts at 7:30 in the morning, or someone going to be out like that, out at 8 Mile Plains at the Glen Hotel. And then, as I said, there's a couple of stalls happening across Metro North. So I'm happy to share those details with with this group if people want to come along. And of course, we do offer community legal education around elder abuse, how to recognize it, how to respond to it, and then how you can refer. And often we're not the appropriate service to refer to. You might need to refer to ADA, where Jason is. And so happy to do that on an individual level. I'm happy for my email to be shared if people want to reach out to me. But it's a really important day to recognize, and this conversation is really important to me given the work that I do, especially in the recognition, after the National Elder Abuse Prevalence Study in 2020 or 21 found that 1 in 6 older people reported experiencing some form of elder abuse. So it's a really prevalent issue, and it's an issue that affects so many older people. So I think that we all have a role to play there, regardless of, you don't have to be a lawyer to help people experiencing elder abuse, or to even, adopt human rights and think about human rights. And so really happy to engage with people in community around how to support people, but particularly within our health justice partnerships. If anyone here is from a hospital in Metro South or Metro North that hasn't heard about us, really keen to engage with you. So thanks for letting me talk about that.
Thanks, Tilé. I think really good to promote those events. We'll certainly send out any information we can around that. And, really alarming statistics there that you say that 1 in 6 people experience that. Lauren, I've done what I tend to do and given you less time than you probably need to get through your bit. So I'll hand over to you. Everyone, this is our wonderful colleague, Lauren Bicknell, who's going to talk through some of the information inquiries and consultations.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for all of our wonderful participants and panelists. This has been a really interesting discussion. So throughout today's session, we've been talking a little bit about the Human Rights Act review. This is a really significant moment where we can all reflect on how transformative this act has been, areas that we're seeing really positive outcomes, but also areas where it could be strengthened or opportunities where our engagement with the Act could be matured. So QCOS is going to be engaging in this review really, really actively, and we're very keen to help others also participate in it. So first up, we do have a webinar on Monday. It'll be quite a special webinar where we have our CEO interviewing the independent reviewer, Professor Susan Harris-Rimmer. If you have any interest in this review or just in human rights in general, I really encourage you to register. We do always try to make recordings of these things available afterwards where possible. So even if you're not available at that time, you could likely get a recording afterwards. On top of that, we're going to be aiming to build a template submission, which can hopefully support others to think about writing a submission to the review, just to sort of help people get a start. Submissions are due on the 21st of June, so we all have about a month. In addition to that, if there is any interest from community service organisations who are keen to write a submission and would like to talk about that process collaboratively, send us an email, because we're considering holding a bit of a working group meeting, just a fairly informal Teams meeting where people can discuss the sorts of things they'd like to say, raise any questions they may have for each other, and just sort of support each other through that process and potentially support each other's ideas through our own submissions. So I'm just popping in the email address for the research team, and you're all very welcome and encouraged to contact us there. You can also encourage your clients and service users to complete the survey on the Independent Review website. So there's a survey that is designed primarily for people who have personal experience with the Act, for example, making a complaint, that sort of thing. So there are parts of this review that are tailored towards the general public as well as, other types of organisations. So we're really excited about this and very keen to connect with as many people as possible across the community service sector. Additionally to that, I'll just get the next slide up. It's currently a sitting week in Queensland, so there's going to be probably a few more things coming up soon. I did notice there's a bill, criminal justice legislation, sexual violence and other matters amendment bill. We don't know when submissions will be due to that, and the inquiry page isn't live yet, but I imagine it will be soon. And there's also a media release about that bill. So I do find sometimes that helps to sort of get a sense of the purposes and intentions behind different pieces of legislation. And we do expect to see the introduction of an anti-discrimination bill at some point. As some of you may be aware, DJAG did consult on the draft bill publicly, so we'll be keeping our eyes peeled for when that might be introduced into Parliament and open for further submissions. We do like to encourage people to connect with us if they have an interest in that space, whether it's providing feedback or talking through the approach to writing your own submissions. So we do try to be as approachable as possible, and we're a fairly friendly bunch. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, there is so much going on. I think we're so excited to have our wonderful CEO, Amy McVie, speaking directly with Professor Susan Harris-Rimmer, the independent reviewer. It's such a privilege to be able to host that. So just to reiterate, that is coming up on Monday, 27th of May. You can find information in the chat there on our website, and really encourage you to attend. We do, and just referencing Lauren's comments about engaging with us, we are really I think excited about the opportunity for this review and the voice that our sector can have in the process. We really acknowledge the strength and value that the Act has brought to our society, and recognise that there's lots more that we can do as well. Often with this process, QCOS is really interested in a couple of things around the use of this network and any of our events, in terms of providing a space to be a conduit of information for the likes of the independent reviewer and access to that for yourselves, as well as to hear your voices, your examples of how it's used in practice, your examples of or thoughts on where we need to focus for the review and continue to mature. I think your voice across the range of different organisations you work in and services that you provide and people you work with is invaluable. So we really can't iterate enough to please reach out to us, either if you're looking for some support around how you engage with the process, or if you have even just a small example or a small insight into what it looks like in practice. Collectively, those stories and voices can be immensely powerful, and it enables us as the peak body of community services to have a common voice that we're sharing to government there. Folks, it's 10:57. We're about to wrap up. I believe magically we may have a poll appear around your experience of today. That's really helpful to get your insights and reflections on this event and the human rights networks that we'll continue to have. As mentioned, we do have the webinar on Monday, which will be here in the blink of an eye. Here's the poll coming up. There's just a few questions there. I appreciate people have a bit of polling fatigue at times, but really helpful to get your insights. We will also have our next Human Rights Network after Monday's webinar in July that we'll advertise. As people start to complete the polls, we will start to draw this to the close, and I want you to just join me in virtually applauding or thanking. I'm not sure what it looks like in joining me, but thanking Tilé, Emo, Jason Abrams, Samantha Shipman, and Deanne Lawrie. Many thanks to you all for your contribution, insights, reflections, and points here today. It's been hugely valuable for myself, the QCOS team, and for everyone here. And as well, I want to thank you and acknowledge the great work that you do each and every day. This is such an important area of where we're working. And just really want to acknowledge your time and efforts. So thank you kindly. I could see some little virtual hands clapping earlier. So you'll just have to.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you, folks. We will draw that to a close. The poll is still open there, and we encourage you to reach out, and we'll share as much information as we can. Otherwise, enjoy your wonderful busy Wednesdays ahead of you.